Hey everybody. I'm not as polished a presenter, so apologies up front. Yeah, I used to be a journalist, and then earlier this year I started working in the drone industry, which I covered for a long time, and I got the opportunity to speak here at Hardwired, and Frontier Tech was what it said on the sort of like mission for the group. So I thought maybe we'd talk about, you know, innovation and the next big thing, but for drones there's also the literal frontier. So one of the things that's interesting for me working in the drone industry is that this is really advanced technology that's often deployed to some of the most remote and dangerous places in the world to do interesting things. So I'm going to give you a walkthrough of that and then talk a little bit about the industry and where I think it's headed, and then we can take questions. So here's a picture from our latest drone way up in the mountains, and here is a drone that we flew into a volcano, which is usually a bad idea. But this was a marketing stunt with Good Morning America. So how deep into the volcano can you fly the drone? Pretty deep, it turns out. And then earlier this year, there was a serious event in Hawaii where there was active volcanoes, and they were using drones in situations like this to track lava flows and tell people when they had to evacuate or, you know, which route would be best for them. So the polar opposite of drones would be glaciers. This here is a drone operating, I believe, in Iceland, along with a search and rescue team. So you see a lot of UAVs, drones being deployed in conditions with really high winds, with sub-zero temperatures, -30. And I'll tell you a cool story later about some drones in Greenland that are deployed to a glacier and are actually looking hundreds of feet into the ice to find hidden things. But we'll get to that later. And this is after disasters, which you heard about before from Grant, but I would say we've seen over the last 2 years that drones are just an absolutely essential piece of the toolkit for first responders, for people in emergency services and public safety. And increasingly, right after a disaster, you're going to see drones in action for insurance companies, for reconstruction, as Grant mentioned, maybe for setting up an impromptu cell network. So all kinds of cool stuff that you can do with drones when it comes to emergency response. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about where the ecosystem came from, and maybe that ties back into what some of you are doing today. So my understanding is that, you know, for a long time, drones were primarily in the realm of the military-industrial complex. A lot of the technology that they used was import or export controlled. And then, you know, the smartphone revolution came along, and as a very smart man, Chris Anderson once told me, drones are the peace dividend of the smartphone wars, which means that all the cool components like gyroscopes and accelerometers and IMUs and magnetometers and the tiny cameras and chips that are really useful for building a drone, those all came way, way down in cost and in size because smartphones and tablets were big business. And once that stuff kind of became public domain, it was no longer such a big deal from a security perspective for ordinary folks to access this stuff and start building their own quadcopters. So I was just, a startup reporter doing stuff about Silicon Alley. I knew nothing about drones, and I went to South by Southwest 2013 and I saw this thing, which is the DJI Phantom 1 with a GoPro Hero 2. So there were a number of companies that were creating online communities like DIY drones or open source software, or in the case of DJI, they were building components for hobbyists to use in their drones. And they realized after a while, wow, we're shipping a lot of these components. Maybe we could make a drone that could be for people who don't know how to program and how to solder, it just flies out of the box. And so they created this thing, and that kind of sparked a whole new industry of super accessible, affordable, yet powerful consumer drones. When I saw this thing in 2013, the big feature was return to home, which I guess is like semi-autonomous. It would take off, it would fly away, you'd press a button and it would come back and land kind of close to where you took off. So that was cutting edge in 2013. I don't know, can I play this video? I put a video on here to show you how awesome the footage was. This really blew my mind in 2013. It doesn't look so good anymore. Yeah, this is a GoPro on a DJI Phantom with no stabilization, flying out of our hotel Marriott in Austin, Texas. That is yuck. But at the time, this was really revolutionary stuff. Only 5 years ago. Yeah, look at that shake. That's terrible. So let's see here. I might have to cut off of here before I keep going. All right, so after the, So after I went to South by Southwest in 2013, I was really excited about drones, and I decided that I would cover them for The Verge. And we covered all kinds of consumer technology, phones and tablets and laptops. And one of the really interesting things was like phones and tablets, they would get like a millimeter thinner or a couple ounces lighter, or round corners instead of square corners. With drones over the last 5 years, it felt like every new unit was half the size and weight of the unit before it, but it had a better camera system, it had more advanced autonomous technology, and often it was lower in price. So this really incredible evolution that moved really fast, and has still not really hit a wall in terms of the gains we can make. So it was consumer innovation that was driving that first sort of cycle in the market, the DIY drone side. Now there's a lot of big established companies that are the ones pushing the innovation in drones. So on the new frontier, it's kind of the enterprise and industrial sector. We've seen, millions of drones be acquired by consumers over the last few years. The FAA expects that market to triple again by 2021. But in the enterprise and consumer space, there's still a lot of sort of that frontier approach where folks are hacking together their own solutions to whatever the problem it is that's in front of them. So I'll show you a few of the ones that are pretty interesting to me. So this is a hazmat unit out of North Carolina, and they stapled this attachment there to the back with a radiation detector. So this drone was originally meant for doing like Hollywood-style cinematography. It has a camera that can turn 360 degrees, and so the hazmat team just uses that to turn the camera around and read the radiation detector in case they're headed to a site where they might want to bring some extra tools or it's a little bit dangerous. This was a group that did some work over the last summer in a glacier in Greenland. This is the way they used to do the work. They're dragging ground-penetrating radar over this glacier here that can look deep into the ground for some airplanes that were lost during World War II and have been lost ever since. And this summer they hung that ground-penetrating radar from the drone and just flew it over the glacier. So this is a big improvement because now you don't have to worry about falling in a crevasse or getting eaten by a polar bear. And they can cover, they told me, about the same amount of space in a half-an-hour drone flight, as they could in a whole day of getting out there on the ice with the sled. And actually, about a week after I learned about this story, I saw another drone with ground-penetrating radar, and the proposal there was to use it to look for buried landmines in former conflict zones. So just really kind of blew me away because you don't think about things in the air looking underground. And then I have an example here, which we talked about before. In the aftermath of a disaster, drones might be used for mapping or gathering data, maybe a cell network. But actually, over the last year, we've seen them used for physically restoring infrastructure. So this is a worker from Duke Energy in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, and they were using the drones to carry power lines, over gorges or rivers, areas that would have been very difficult to access with what they had on the ground. And here's another crazy video I'm going to show you. Again, not a place you would expect to see drones. This is from an Australian startup called Emacent, and they take drones and they fly them down in mines deep underground. So this is a 3D scan of mine shafts made by a drone that they have flying through this underground set of caverns. It's got a LiDAR strapped to the bottom there, and it's making a 360-degree model. And so, yeah, one of the things that really sort of blew my mind about that was that the drone had 3 different settings. You could fly the drone with like a little bit of a autonomous assist, so I'm going to fly, but help me not to crash. Or you could ask the drone to just fly an area that you had previously mapped. So go out and explore this space. We know what's going on. Go out and explore it. Or the third setting, which is where Frontier comes in, the CEO is telling us, just go and explore this like set of caverns we've never been in before and don't crash into anything, and then bring us back the map. And the algorithm inside is basically just set to optimize for, find a new frontier, find a space we haven't been in yet, and come back and tell us about that. So I'm not very good at making charts. I stole this one from McKinsey. But, just looking at a bunch of different industries where edge computing might grow really rapidly over the next, decade or so, and thinking about all the different spots where drones or robotics might play a role. And I think that, drones really represent a lot of the things that Hardwired talks about. So robotics, AI, autonomy. And I think that when you look at a chart like this, you realize that, we have a very narrow definition of what drones might be able to do, but it's changing very rapidly. So, I guess when I think about what lies ahead and like what my challenges are, what my job is about, it's being in a frontier industry and dealing with competition, but also with regulation and with what happens from incumbent or adjacent industries that might be disrupted. So drone delivery, obviously, something we've all been promised, but as Grant pointed out, the proliferation of consumer and commercial drones has raised a lot of eyebrows from people in different industries, whether you have a football stadium or a prison or a nuclear power plant. So, I think a lot of what we try to do at DJI is work with regulators to come up with, sensible regulations that continue to foster innovation, and to work with partners in adjacent industries or, with startups to figure out ways to mitigate, people who could fly in a way that's educated and informed and safe. They just need a little bit of help. Or in the instance where they're not, how do we deal with those situations? So, there's drone detection. There's sort of the license plate reader for a drone approach. We now make technology that is being used by law enforcement, has been used at the World Series and other VIP type events that will tell you who's flying, where's the pilot located, how to contact the pilot. And so that, I think, is one area where we're going to see a lot of development. This is an aeronautical chart of New York. It's super confusing, I know, because I had to study this for my commercial pilot certification. And so another thing that's pretty interesting that's happening now is there's kind of an integration between the regulatory layer and the app layer. So you can now apply to the FAA for permission to fly in restricted airspace, and they'll respond to you within 10 minutes and tell you, okay, you can fly there now or you can't. So this whole map full of all of these complex and very old world regulations is now available, and not just available, but you can actually make a request to sort of get around the rules or break the rules as needed for commercial operations, right inside of a mobile app. And another kind of cool integration that we're seeing, as the frontier industry tries to work with the incumbents, or a lot of manned aircraft have a technology called ADS-B that they use to understand where other aircraft are. And now drones are starting to add ADS-B receivers. So right from the mobile app of a small, $1,000 quadcopter, you can get a heads up about where sort of, manned aircraft are in your area, which direction they're headed, how fast they're going, stuff like that. So I put this slide on here because, I don't know, you have to put the drone taxi slide on there, right? But yeah, I think what's interesting is that there is probably as much activity when it comes to startups in the counter-drone space as the drone space. And that tells you everything you need to know in terms of just how sort of frontier this industry is. But I think one of the things that gets me excited about the drone industry is maybe even more than driverless cars, we're actually putting very advanced autonomous robotics out into the hands of consumers and commercial businesses. And they're testing out what's possible with this stuff, what's safe, and where there's maybe a real business or where there's just hype. So the FAA has a bunch of pilot programs running in different states around the United States. And so they're testing out things like drone delivery on a golf course in North Dakota. So you can get your hamburger delivered to the 9th green of the golf course, which sounds like something for rich people, but if you can prove out that, hey, this is safe, this is repeatable, we have the data to show you how we did it, then you can move on to delivering things like medicine. You can, work between hospitals. You can start to do it in more densely populated urban areas. So, I feel like the drone industry has changed so much in just the 5 years since I was down at South by Southwest in 2013. And right now we're in this really exciting place where the government is finally allowing commercial operators to really get down to business. They are experimenting with some of the more ambitious and dangerous missions in a very controlled way. And I think consumers, especially on the commercial side, are still driving a lot of new innovation, which is exciting because they're sort of pushing that frontier forward. So that's my presentation, and happy to take any questions.
I'd like to know, how long does the drone stay in the air now?
Great question. This, I would say, is one of the most frustrating things about drones, is that we haven't created some awesome new batteries that make the drones stay up for a really long time. So the drones continue to get smaller and smaller and smaller, but the battery life has stayed roughly the same. So your best sort of prosumer consumer drones stay in the air for maybe 25, 30 minutes, and the really high-end Hollywood rigs maybe 30 to 45 minutes. There are some super heavy-duty, like industrial drones that are hydrogen-powered that stay in the air for hours, but most drones, the smaller they get, the shorter the battery life.
Great presentation. What country or countries would you say are most advanced in drone commercial uses? And what kind of things do you think help them get there?
Yeah, great question. So, I think China is obviously very advanced. They have one of the leading manufacturers, and they do a ton of enterprise work. They have a lot of work being done on the agriculture side that we don't see in the United States yet. And then there are nations, for example, like Iceland, where they have cities that I think are in some ways very urban, but in some ways very rural. And so they have been testing really widespread drone delivery in Reykjavik for, I think, 12 months now on a day-to-day basis. And then, like I said, the United States, I think, played a big role in sort of that DIY boom, has a lot of great, venture investment in the drone space. And the FAA, I feel, has, really turned a page over the last 3 years, gone from sort of like holding the US back compared to other places like Europe and Japan to allowing, at least on a piece-by-piece basis, some experimentation with more advanced drone operations.
Great presentation. My question is, how do you see the drone industry evolving within the next 5 years?
Sure. When I look at it, what's really happening now is there's finally sort of like a robust, reliable robotics platform that you can adapt to different industries. So where I see a lot of the growth coming is places that to me are initially unexpected, whether that's doing exploration in mining caverns or scanning and stopping poachers on large wildlife reserves, or using a multispectral camera to tell if your crops are healthy or your soil is too dry. So the enterprise, industrial, commercial side of things, using new sensor packages that consumers themselves or the customer themselves designs for a specific application, on top of a drone platform where they can use the SDK to build their own app or access the internals. Okay.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Are all of your drones flying drones, or are they underwater drones or land-based vehicles?
Yeah, great question. All of the stuff that DJI sells is flying drones, but we do have an annual collegiate robotics tournament that they put on every year in Shenzhen. So it's kind of like BattleBots meets League of Legends. So if you're in college and you want to create a team, you can come to Shenzhen next July and battle your ground robots in a giant arena. It's pretty awesome.
All right, thank you so much, Ben. Really appreciate it.